What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel. I'm Titus, and today I'm bringing you guys another tier maker list. Now, the thing is, I'm gonna be honest with you guys, I really just kind of like making these. I've always been very fascinated with people's opinions when it comes to judging things against each other and whatnot. That's a long-winded way of saying nothing much at all, except for the fact that I just kind of like making these, and that's why I'm making one. So today, we're going to be talking about all of the runes in ELement Fission that you can get your hands on and which ones I think are kind of, you know, the ones that you should be investing in, investing your time into trying to farm, right? So without further ado, let's crack right into it. So I've ordered all of these in terms of the different bosses and basically left to right from Boxing Club all the way to Anonymous. And essentially the way that the game kind of sets you up into delving into those dungeons, right? So first things first, we got Power Rune, which is just 2-piece set bonus, and you get 20% attack. And I think this is, I'm tempted to put it somewhere between A and B, because this is kind of, when you're talking about building out a nuker, right? This rune will be, even if I think there are other maybe 4-piece sets that I'll get to later on that I think are better, chances are this is going to be a 2-piece bonus that kind of rounds out the 6 pieces. So maybe for now I'll put this in A. All right, next up we've got Bash, and Bash is just a 2 or 4-piece. I have to remind myself sometimes what these like exactly what these are, because I try not to remind myself from Raid, because Raid has a different kind of setup for its runes. We have a lot of the same effects, and I'm also trying not to let that bias affect me when I'm kind of judging this. But of course, I mean, we're all creatures of bias. So for a 4-piece set bonus, you're getting 20% chance to stun with a reduced chance on multi-hits. Now in Raid, we have a stun set. It's 18%, but there's no reduced chance on multi-hits. So I think I'm going to put this in. It's tough. It's somewhere between C and B, and I'm going to put it ultimately, I think, in C. I'm gonna put this in C mostly because, so my thought process is, when you're using a rune like this, when you're building out, say, a PvP team, you probably don't want to hedge your bets on your winning strategy being based off of the Bash set proccing. And in most dungeon content right now, any other kind of wave-based content besides TOA, though, so basically what I'm, besides that, you don't really worry about the waves very much. And I guess in TOA hard, or even in TOA normal, if you're having problems with waves, Bash is probably a set on someone with a lot of multi-hits and AoEs where it might help you progress through certain stages. But generally speaking, it seems like you're going to put this set on somebody, get through that content, and then probably take this set off for a better set. So that's kind of how I think about that. All right, moving on from speed, no surprises probably to anybody. Speed's going to be an S tier because speed is just king in this game. And a 4-piece set giving you 20 extra speed, which kind of amounts to, it's one of those things where it really only amounts to like 1 piece that's maybe not even your best roll. I mean, even on my account, I have speed items where, the substat for speed is like 24, 26. So a 4-piece set bonus only giving you 20 probably doesn't seem like a lot, but it's one of those things where you're trying to get as much speed as possible. So I think speed set is probably S tier. Speed is just so king in this game that even only 20 of it is pretty good. All right, next up we have Revenge, and Revenge is the counterattack set. I'm going to go ahead and put this in, I'm gonna put this in B tier. I think there's plenty of use cases for certain people. I know that you can run this on, say, the bears in PvP, probably PvE as well, but I don't see a lot of people running the bears in PvE. But, you know, anybody who has an A1 that's pretty good for what it is. So, you know, the bears in PvP, thinking of like dome fighters and their stuns, you know, there's like I said, I've kind of talked about how, you know, say the water dome fighter or the light dome fighter, where you're placing a taunt on everybody and then having an A1 that stuns. This revenge set coupled with the taunt and the A1, I think there's a lot of scenarios even outside of that where I think having someone counterattacking is pretty good. So I don't know that it's amazing, but I'm going to put that in B. Moving on from there, we've got the crit set, and I'm going to put the crit set in B as well, mostly because crit is one of those things where, unlike kind of attack power and speed, where you theoretically you never have enough of it, you always want more of it. Crit, until you hit 100% crit, you really want crit, and then once you hit 100% crit, it becomes completely useless. So I think I'm gonna put it in B. It's a really good set early on for when your gear is not great on your account and you're having a hard time crit capping your nukers and stuff like that. But once you get to that point, this set kind of goes from like S tier to D tier, right? You know, early on it's gonna be one of the best sets you can get your hands on, and then once you're able to actually crit cap efficiently, it's going to be useless. So I'm going to put it in a solid B tier. All right, the final set coming out of Boxing Club, we have Inspire. Now, this might be a bit controversial, but I mean, I'm not I make controversial takes all the time. So, or maybe, I don't know. Sometimes it seems like I'm making a controversial take that I don't think is controversial. And sometimes I feel like I'm making a controversial take and nobody else agrees. So I don't know. But I'm gonna put Inspire in C, and the reason is kind of like the crit. Well, actually, okay, I'll put it in B, and I'm gonna put it in B much for the same reason that I'm putting the crit set in B, because Inspire is really good for bringing up your nuker, but it's the only person that it's really going to help, right? If I have 4 Mons on a team that have, you know, if I have 4 Mons on a team that are all built out and as much Inspire as possible, it's really basically I'm hedging and funneling all my bets onto one Mon, right? My attacker. And it's only attack based, so it's only going to be for that nuker. And it's one of those things where it's like much like crit. Early on in an account, when you're having a hard time getting, you know, a speed farm going for, say, you know, Boxing Club, and you need your Bookworm to have a certain level of attack and crit damage to be able to one-shot the waves so that you can then effectively, you know, speed farm, it's great. But once you get better statted and kind of better itemized pieces on your account, I think Inspire in most cases is going to fall by the wayside. That's just kind of my opinion. That's kind of how I see with a lot of these games where, you know, we're still in a very early cycle of the game. I mean, there's a lot of people who have sprinted to the end and are kind of sitting there at the end. But for the average player, Inspire is going to be really good to get you through those certain breakpoints, but eventually gear itself is just going to get you there. And then once your gear gets you there, you're probably not going to want to use as much Inspire, but you still might use it in certain cases. You know what I mean? Like it's not like it's going to be completely useless later on in the game. It's just going to become way more niche, I think, once you're able to effectively gear up some of your other mods. All right, moving on from there, we got Focus. Now, this is a 2-piece that gives you 20% accuracy, and I'm going to go ahead and put this in somewhere between B and C, because accuracy is very important until it's not in PvE. And then there's a use case for PvP where if ELement Fission PvP at the high end is anything kind of like raid PvP high end, there suddenly starts to become a really big contest between accuracy and people stacking resistance. And so I think maybe I think I'm going to tentatively put it in C. It's going to definitely have some niche cases, but I don't know that for most Mons, especially in PvE, which definitely makes it more niche. I think you're able to hit most accuracy checks without needing to use this as a set bonus. That's just kind of my thought process on it. All right, moving on from there. Echo S tier. I mean, I think there's so much potential for Echo in PvE, especially in the really high-end content in PvE, like Abyssal Dungeons and specifically the Colossi, where Echo really shines. I mean, just the fact that, you know, there's so many people who could really utilize this very well in the game. You know, so many Elements that just having, I mean, you know, 40% chance to essentially, it's not even just the attack itself. It's the fact that it also duplicates the effect of the attack, right? And so, for instance, if you have a 2-hitter that does a stun, like we were talking about the Dome Fighter, well, now this triggers you're getting an extra hit with an extra, you know, 60% chance on that hit to also stun, right? So the, you know, 2-hitter becomes a triple hitter, 60% every time. You know, Fire Gunslinger, this is like a really well-known set from him. Dark Giant is another one that comes to mind that I've thought about in terms of a lot of PvE and PvP content on his A3, because if you proc Echo, you're reducing the turn meter by 100% and then also guaranteeing the stun. And so I think there's a lot of use cases. I think this is one of those sets where the more people who come into the game, the more people who play around with it and kind of find new and unique cases for it. I think we're going to see a lot more of this set on top of where we're already kind of, you know, where we're already at with it. All right, then we have the Protect set. This is just a 2-piece shield set, much like in Raid, where it scales much like our bolster set or our shield set, except interestingly enough, this is a 2-piece instead of a 4-piece. And so, well, our shield set is 2-piece, our bolster is 4-piece, but bolster does something different. Like I said, I'm trying not to be too Raid brained with this, but it's hard not to think about the, you know, the use cases. So I think I'm going to put this in B. I think there's a lot of cases where this set will help you get through some harder PvP content or PvE content. I think there's use cases in PvE for, you know, if you're putting this on somebody with a high health bar that is helping you get through, you know, avoid, you know, on like a defense, avoiding, you know, a cleave team, like a speed cleave team where, you know, their goal is to just one-shot you. The shield helps not getting one shot. So, you know, I think B is a fair, there's plenty of use cases for it. I think it's not something you're going to stack a ton of, but I think putting 1 or 2 sets on your highest health character, if you're having a hard time getting through some TOA stages or you're struggling to, you know, push B10 on some of the dungeons, I think this set will get you there for sure. So then we have Zeal. This is the 1-turn immunity set. I'm going to put this in B simply because sets like these are usually, a lot of times, their power is defined by really, really high-end PvP, where this set will probably, as the meta kind of, you know, as the meta evolves, but then starts to like solidify around certain strategies, I think having immunity, I mean, for instance, you know, I think about my light queen, my light music queen, and how devastating her A3 is with Oblivion and Silence. And so if you have like a setup on a team where you really can't afford that, then maybe putting this on somebody like a cleanser who can then, you know, go first, or, you know, if your team is go second, but they're your fastest person, they go first, cleanse everybody, and then you can still continue on with your, you know, the plans for your team, right? And so I think stuff like this, it's hard to define, because while it's super niche, usually in the niche that it's in, it becomes like meta defining. So that's kind of my thought process about it. All right, what is this? Steady. This is the glancing set. So 2-piece, 12% glance. I'm gonna put this in C. Again, this strikes me as a PvP. So what this strikes me as is this is a PvP set where you put this on somebody because you need to guarantee that their debuffs do not get resisted because of glancing hits from bad affinities. So my first thought process is someone like Water Puppet Master, super duper duper popular in PvP. His A1 decreasing turn meter, and then his is it 3 or 2, where he does the AoE and then he freezes, drops defense, and potentially, all that, like freezes people and drops defense, right? If your strategy is heavily based on that, because those hits need to land through glancing, right? Then in order for your strategy to work effectively, you have to avoid glancing hits. This is probably a set, maybe you slap on, 1 or 2 pieces for it so that you just ensure that you don't glance. Outside of that, though, for dungeons and everything else, because there's not a lot of things that kind of hamper your ability to build, because PvE monsters are static. They don't think. They follow their programming and that's it. This set probably isn't as important because you just build a team around that. Where in PvP, there's, as like if you're on defense and you have like a Water Puppet artist, there's you would put this on him, because then it's like, okay, I'll hit my AoE, we'll get the drop defense, and then whatever, your plan is after that, right? So it's in its niche, it's good, but I don't think it's as meta defining in that niche as, say, like the immunity set. All right, then we have precision. This is at 8% accuracy for everybody. I'm gonna put this in B, but I'm gonna put this in B. I think there's so many mons in the game and so many kits that have a lot of debuffs and a lot of like accuracy needed, that I actually think that in some ways this has more longevity than the Inspire set, simply because accuracy is one of those things where it is just more universally useful across a team than Inspire, which is just, it's only for your nuker, right? Whereas with this, you put 3 sets of this on a support, it's giving everybody 24% accuracy. And what does that do? Well, that lowers the barrier of entry to all the other builds. And so it opens up design space for coming up with more, not needing to build towards accuracy for everybody, right? And just being able to focus it on like 1 or 2 people, giving it to everybody. So I think for that reason, it's probably B tier. All right, moving on from there, we got life set. And this might be the first D. Life set it seems good on paper, but the thing is, most of the times when you have a tanky ELement, you also have other things that they're doing that you care more about than just giving them what is, if you put 3 sets of this on somebody, it's basically like adding an extra main stat rune with no substats, right? Like that's basically what it equals, right? Because it's 20% for a 2-piece, so 6 pieces would give you 60%. So you follow the logic, right? There are almost no elements that I can think of off the top where just stacking HP is more than enough. You know what I mean? Even in the wildest cases of like HP based nukers, which the game does have a few that I can think of, you probably want them in other sets. And maybe this becomes the 2-piece, much like the power one, right? But I don't know. I attack for attack-based nukers versus HP for HP-based nukers, it doesn't scale the same way in my experience when it comes to, like playing raid. You pretty much never would put an HP set. To be fair, in raid, most flat stat sets were very bad. You never touch them. In this game, I think there's more cases for, say like attack, but because of the way that the runes are designed. So yeah, I'm not digging it. I'm not feeling it. It's not for me. All right. Immortal, a one-time revive at 30% HP. Yeah, 30% HP once per battle. Again, this seems like a PvP. You have a strategy built around PvP. It's very niche, but it can probably get the job done sometimes. So I'm going to put that in C. I don't see a lot of use case for it outside of, like I said, super niche PvP use. But I imagine that somebody will find, you know, some kind of design where having, you know, people revive. I mean, hell, even if you put this on literally in your entire defense, and so somebody comes in, pops all their you know, buffs, speed cleaves your team revives, cleanses all, you know, strips all the buffs, locks them out, you know, as like a go second thing. I could definitely see the use case there, but it's super niche and I don't think that it's got a lot of longevity. All right, vampire set. I'm going to put this in C as well. I think, again, it's very neat. There's certain cases where, for instance, in the very, very, very early game, your campaign, putting this, like a set of this, like the free set that the game gives you on your campaign farmer, will help them with sustainability. But outside of that, I think maybe I could see a use case, much like in our clan boss and raid, where your Colossi team and your Abyssal Dungeon teams are kind of built around a lot of heavy sustain from certain people, but it's kind of hard for me to see how that would function. So I'm gonna put it in C for now. But like I said, I mean, a lot of this could be subject to change. So who knows? I could be wrong about literally every single thing I just said, and that's fine. You know, you learn from your mistakes. All right, moving on from there, Corrupt. This is the Destroy Max HP set. This is way too niche, I think, to be really, really useful. I mean, maybe in PvP against certain strats, like the bears like to do a lot of self-healing as a counter to that, but you might not even have enough turns to really make that effective. And you're not using this in, I mean, the only other dungeon I can think of is Death Lab, but I mean, you'd rather just bring block healing instead of destroying max HP, and you get so much access to block healing that it's a total non-starter for me. D tier, absolutely. All right, Mend. Put this on somebody and they get 12% extra healing, scaling up to 36%. I think because this game has a lot more endurance test stuff than Raid does, I actually think this could probably be a B tier set, where for Abyssal Dungeons and Colossi, you put 3 sets of this on like a dedicated healer, somebody who's got a lot of healing in the kit or has like a low cooldown with their healing. And then, 36%. Now I'm imagining that this is 36%. This is multiplicative and not additive. And so if your skill heals 30%, this doesn't suddenly become 66%. It's 36% of the 30%, right? But there are quite a few elements in the game that have very consistent healing. And so I think building a strategy around them for endurance stuff is actually quite viable. And it's probably something as I farm out more Death Lab that I might test around, might mess around with, mess around a bit with. All right, finally we've got Bless HP of, so this is basically the HP version of Inspire and Precision. I think we'll put this in C tier, and that's because there's not a whole lot. I mean, even in the endurance stuff, I think you still probably want to bring. So Inspire is really good early on to help you get to certain breakpoints, right? Precision is going to bring you accuracy. The reason I'm putting this in C over these two, the kind of thought process is, if I'm in an endurance run, I would still rather bring a bunch of precision stuff and Inspire stuff to help my nukers and help my you know, the accuracy checks that I need to make. And then with that accuracy check, like gone, I could then just individually itemize HP and defense, right? As opposed to trying to stack it a bunch on your team. I think that the more I think about it, there are some niche cases I could think of where if you have a team dedicated around HP nukers and a lot of people who deal damage based off of HP, this obviously would be like an S tier rune, but in general use, I think it's C tier. And that's to be fair with a lot of these runes, is that any C tier rune, if you put in the right strategy, is like S tier, but generally general purpose, you know, I don't think is all that great. All right, moving right along. I had realized that I had some runes misordered, so we're gonna go now on to the Vegas runes, the light runes. And the first one we have is Iron. Iron is 20% defense, much like the HP rune, the attack rune. I'm gonna put this in. Oh man, I think I'm gonna put this in B tier. I'm gonna put this in B tier, mostly because defensive based nukers, this is the attack version, but I think defensive based nukers are usually more niche. And I think that there's probably still a 2-piece rune set outside of that you might consider for a defense based nuker. But this right here, I think is solid middle of the road rune, you know, for tanky people, for defensive based nukers, it's fine. It's fine. Then we have refresh. This is a 30% chance to refresh a skill on the start of your turn, right? So 30% chance to reduce your abilities cooldown at the start of your turn. We do have a set like this in Raid. It's called Reflex. I'm going to put this in. All right. I'm gonna put this finally in B tier. I was gonna put it in C tier, but I think there's a lot of cases where even though it's not guaranteed to refresh your ability, obviously, because that would be stupid broken, I think that this right here is one of those things where, again, in the endurance tests like Abyssal dungeons, like Colossi, I think just having sometimes a skill that just refreshes itself, even in certain dungeons, right? Even in dungeons where, you know, if you're trying to set up a speed farm, let's say you don't have, you know, 2 light popos or new dungeon content comes out later, simply having the ability for certain cooldowns to refresh randomly probably just smooths out the run. And there's probably a couple of elements, none come to mind right now, but there are still probably a couple elements where having this would probably be like your best, the one of the best sets you could put them in. Because like I said, we do have that in Raid where they can be niche, but their niche uses are like, this is best in slot for certain people. So yeah, let's go with that. Shock, critical damage. We're gonna go ahead and put this in S tier. Why? Because as a 4-piece, you're getting 40% crit. Doesn't sound like a lot, but generally speaking, when you're going to min-max your damage, this is probably the set. This is probably the 4-piece set. So there's 2 sets, right, that I think are super endgame damagey sets. This right here, the crit damage set, this is for people with a lot of baked in ignored defense. If you have ignored defense baked into your kit as a nuker, you probably just want the crit damage. This will be your 4-piece, and then attack will be your 2-piece or defense, whatever, right? Like you're going to make your 4-piece the crit damage, and then the 2-piece will be whatever their primary nuking stat is. Reflects. I'm going to put this is just reflecting 5% of incoming damage back to the attacker. I'm going to go ahead and put this in C tier. I think I have spoken with, actually, funnily enough, a conversation between me and Nepo comes up where he was talking about certain like arena matchups where this set becomes like the breaker for what is essentially a draw between 2 Elements in PvP. Outside of that, though, you're not where else are you using this set? You know what I mean? Where you wouldn't just rather have something else, right? Nothing comes to mind specifically. I mean, I can think of memes where, you know, you have a really high health team, you know, which is just based on staying alive, and say, you know, take the Colossi, for instance, right? And your entire team is designed around being super tanky and just surviving, where everyone's wearing reflect sets and your damage to the boss is basically just reflecting back the damage that you take. But I mean, yeah, I don't know. Outside of that, I don't know. Memes. We all love memes. All right, Faith. This is, you gain 5%, or is it 3%? Okay, I almost had them flipped. It's 3% action bar for every 5% HP that you lose. And then, of course, more sets you equip. So this is a 2-piece. So if you had 6 pieces of this, you would gain 9% action bar every time you lost 5% HP. Once again, I'm going to put this in C. However, there are quite a few Elements. Anybody with a lot of sustain, anybody with a lot of self-healing. Funnily enough, like Tree Assassin comes to mind, because his whole thing is slowly grinding people out with poisons. And so, for instance, you throw a bunch of poisons on yourself, that's a lot of healing. And then you throw a lot of poisons on them. And then every time you take hits, the poisons are going to heal you back up, and you're going to get a bunch of action bar. And just being super tanky with a lot of self-healing just helps you kind of grind people out. Outside of that, though, it seems super niche, so I'm putting it in C. Guard, this is defense for all teammates. This is much like all of the other ones, and I'm going to put this in C tier. I just don't think defense, and so here's my thought process. Okay, defense and HP are less important than Inspire, because Inspire helps you with speed runs, getting to the attack percentages that you need to actually effectively do speed runs. And so for that, it is king, right? Precision, accuracy is important on so many different elements. Being tanky is just, you can itemize for that. And again, I would rather throw precision on a bunch of people, make them get the accuracy that I need, and then individually stat out the survivability. That's at least my thought process. But I don't know, because I mean, defense and health are universally useful for everybody. But again, I feel like I would rather use the teammates get X stat on stats that I don't want to itemize, so that I can then itemize differently depending on, you know, like certain, like I said, I'd rather get all the accuracy out of the way with those kind of sets, and then itemize for tankiness or luck or something else, right? So that's kind of my thought process. All right, and now moving on to the dark gears. As we moved on, I actually decided to put the defense set up to A, mostly because the more I thought about it, it actually does just kind of really coincide with the way I graded the power one. And so I decided to move it up a little bit, you know what I mean? Outside of that, let's get the dark gear out of the way, and then we'll see where the table falls. So for the dark gears, we've got Endure. This is Resist. This is going into the, this is going to go into the B tier. I think there's a lot of cases for where you want to hit certain resistances in PvE and mostly in PvP, but I think even in some PvE cases, getting enough resistance so that, you know, certain people, if you need to avoid certain effects, I actually can see a lot of, like, I really do enjoy the resistance stat. And again, this might be a bit of a raid bias on this one specifically too. So that is my, yeah, that's kind of my general thought process. All right, Freedom. I'm going to put in A tier. I don't think it's as good as the speed set itself. And there is a lot of, it does feel very constricting to put 4 whole pieces to get 6 speed across the board. But, you know, basically you're giving someone 4 pieces to essentially get 30 speed across your team. I think I definitely think that there's probably at least one person on your team, every team you build, where getting that extra 6 speed will probably be meaningful in some regard. But I might be overvaluing speed the more I'm thinking. As I go through this tier list, I really do start to think maybe I'm overvaluing speed a little bit, because ELement Fission doesn't quite seem to play out the same way Raid does. So I'm not 100% sure. I guess we'll see, right? All right, then we have Discover. I'm gonna put this in A as well, mostly because luck is absolutely king for PvE, and so anywhere you can get extra luck rate, I mean, you know, this is one of those things where if you put this on a support, it's only 18% luck, but that 18% luck, you know, you're stacking luck everywhere, right? And so every little bit of luck that you can get where you know, don't need other sets, I think this is just really, really good. So now we have, what is it? The Ambush. Ambush is S tier. This was the other damage set that I was talking about. So in Raid, at least, the most efficient way to deal damage is to ignore defense at certain defense breakpoints. And what I mean by that is essentially the way the defense curve works and the amount of damage that's being mitigated. There's a certain point where ignoring that defense becomes the end all be all for the best way to deal damage. This is the other nuker set. If nukers with a lot of ignore defense built into the kit take the crit damage set, nukers that don't have that luxury are going to take the ignore defense set. And then your other 2 piece will be whatever appropriate nuking stat comes along with that. So then we have Cloaking. Give yourself a one turn of stealth at the start of combat. This is, yeah, I think it's too niche. I think I'm gonna put it in C. Sure, I can tell some arguments. I can hear them right now, you know, for PvP, pretty much all PvP, right? Because just one turn in a lot of PvE content's not going to do enough for you. Although I guess I could argue, you could argue, you know, speed farming teams, stuff like that. But no, not even then, right? Not even then. So this is pretty much entirely for PvP, where the thing I think of is like live arena, where you just really need someone to not be targeted on the first turn. Like your strategy is built around someone doing something on the first turn, and they absolutely cannot be targeted. To that extent, I guess I can kind of see the thought process, but outside of that, yeah, and way too niche. And finally, we have the Blur. This is the resistance for all teammates. And this is going to be, do I want to put this in B or C? Because my thought process here is that you want some people to have a lot of resistance because they're going, like say a cleanser, to have a lot of resistance because they're just going to cleanse all the debuffs off of everybody else. But the problem is, this is a 2-piece. You're giving everyone an 8%, but the person who really, really wants the resistance probably also really, really wants the other 12%. So I'm going to put this actually in D tier. I think resistance on people who really want resistance is really good. Like I said, like cleansers in PvP who are going to resist the effects of the debuffs and then take their turn, cleanse all the debuffs, and then you actually, you know, play the match out the way you're planning on it. They probably really want the 12% resistance more than trying to stack a bunch of it across your whole team, right? So yeah, I think this is our final D tier rune. And HP, you know what? I might be a little unkind to, I might be being a little unkind to the HP rune. Let's bring it up to B tier. let's bring it up to B tier. I don't think, the more I think about it, much like in the case of like the power and the iron rune, I think the life rune I get isn't that bad. And I was being a little harsh, and I'll be honest, I was being a little raid brained, I think, because all of our percentage gear pieces, like the percentage sets, are just laughably bad. They're just laughably bad. And no, you never ever, you basically never ever use them. But ELement Fission is not raid. And so, you know, I have to constantly remind myself that this isn't raid. And so, you know, these pieces are probably not as bad. Well, anyway, guys, that's been it for me. This is the tier list. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Do you think I completely missed the mark? Do you think I'm on point? You know, is there a variance in between? What do you think? Do you think that some of these sets are actually sleeper OP? Let me know everything in the comments below. Outside of that, if you liked the video, like and subscribe, all that fancy YouTube stuff. You know, it really means a lot to me, and it helps grow the channel, which means a lot to me. So, you know, outside of that, guys, that's been it for me for now. I've been Titus, and I'll catch you next time.